Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're doing a deep dive today into rationality.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's going to be really fascinating, I think.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at Steven Pinker's book, Rationality.
Mm-hmm.
What it is, why it seems scarce, why it matters.
I'm excited.
Yeah. So we'll be uncovering some key insights from the book about, what rationality is and why it matters so much and why we stray from logic sometimes. What are your first thoughts when you hear the word rationality?
I mean, it's funny because there's this idea out there that humans are just inherently irrational.
Right.
Like we're just these cavemen out of time in the modern world. And Pinker in his book really goes against that.
Yeah.
And I think successfully.
Yeah. So, sometimes I feel like I am ruled by my emotions rather than logic.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we reconcile that with this idea that we're not just these cavemen stumbling around?
Well, I mean, we all feel that way sometimes.
Yeah. For sure.
But Pinker, I think, pretty convincingly argues that even our hunter-gatherer ancestors were highly skilled problem solvers.
Okay.
And they had to be to survive. In challenging environments, they needed a strong grasp of logic and reasoning and understanding cause and effect.
So not just like grunting cavemen.
No, not at all.
Okay.
He uses a really great example in the book, too. The Sand People of the Kalahari Desert.
Oh, interesting.
These folks have incredible tracking skills.
Oh, wow.
And they can deduce all sorts of information just from looking at an animal's tracks.
So it's more than just like following footprints.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Way more. They distinguish individual animals from the tracks. They figure out how long ago the animal passed, how tired the animal was, even its age.
It's just from the hoof prints.
Just from looking at the hoof prints.
That's incredible.
Which takes serious observation and deduction.
Wow.
So
they're using logic and understanding cause and effect, even what we would call like Bayesian reasoning, right?
Exactly.
To understand what's going on in their world.
To make sense of the evidence that they have. So I think it really dismantles that kind of like irrational caveman myth and suggests that rationality is a part of our human heritage.
Okay. That makes me feel a little bit better about my irrational moments, though.
Me too. We all have them.
Yeah. So if we're naturally equipped for rationality, why does it seem like we trip up so often? Like, where do we go wrong?
Well, Pinker starts off with logic, which is considered, I think, kind of the bedrock of rationality.
Yeah.
And to kind of illustrate the appeal of logic and also its challenges, he uses this classic brain teaser called the Wasson selection task.
Okay. I like a good brain teaser.
Yeah, this one's a good one. Imagine 4 cards: a king, a queen, a bird, and a moose.
Okay, got it.
The rule is, if a card has a king on one side, then it has a bird on the other. Which cards do you need to flip over to see if the rule holds true?
Oh, okay. That's tricky.
It is tricky.
I think I would flip over the king to see if it has a bird on the other side, and maybe the bird to see if it has a king.
That's a very, very common answer.
Yeah.
But it's not quite right.
Cool.
You actually need to flip over the king and the moose.
Really? Why the moose?
That's the thing. It seems totally unrelated.
Yeah.
But the moose card is crucial because if you flip it over and you find a king, it violates the rule.
Oh, I see.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this task highlights how even seemingly simple logic puzzles can be counterintuitive.
Right. It's not just about what's right there in front of you. You have to kind of think through all the possibilities.
Yeah. And here's the kicker. Only about 10% of people get this task right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It shows that logic alone isn't enough to explain all of our reasoning. There's more to the story.
Okay, so logic is important, but it can be tricky. So what else do we need to be truly rational then?
That's where probability comes in. Understanding how to navigate a world that's full of uncertainty.
Okay.
We need to be able to assess likelihoods and weigh potential outcomes and make decisions when we don't have all of the information.
Probability. This reminds me of that Monty Hall problem.
Exactly. That's a great example of how probability can really mess with our intuition.
Oh, for sure. Even for really smart people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Can you remind me how that problem works again?
Yeah, so you have 3 doors.
Okay.
And one hides a car.
Got it.
The other 2 have goats.
Okay.
You pick a door, and the host opens one of the other doors, always revealing a goat. You then have the choice to stick with your original door or switch to the remaining closed door. And the question is, should you switch?
It feels like it shouldn't matter, right?
Yeah, you would think so. But I remember there being a right answer. I just can't remember what it is.
You're right, it is totally counterintuitive, but switching doors actually doubles your chances of winning the car.
Wow. Okay. I have to think about that one. Now I really want to hear more about probability.
Yeah.
Tell me about how it works and why it trips us up so easily.
Well, Pinker goes into the different interpretations of probability that we have. So there's, based on possible outcomes, long-run frequencies, or even just our degree of belief. Yeah.
And things get tricky because these interpretations don't always agree.
Right.
And that can lead to a lot of confusion.
So it's not as straightforward as we think. It's not always just calculating odds.
Right. And there's subjectivity involved too, which is always tricky.
Yeah.
And we often fall prey to these common probability blunders. Like, for example, the variability heuristic.
Right. Okay.
So we judge the likelihood of something happening based on how easily we can think of examples.
Like when you see a news report about a plane crash.
Yes.
And then suddenly you feel like flying is so dangerous.
Exactly.
Even though it's probably statistically much safer than driving.
Way safer.
Yeah.
Or think about the O.J. Simpson trial.
Okay.
His lawyer argued that very few men who batter their wives go on to murder them.
But that argument's leaving something out.
It is.
What is it?
It ignores what we call the base rate.
Okay.
The fact that Nicole Simpson wasn't just any victim of domestic abuse, she was a victim of domestic abuse who had been murdered.
So that actually changes the probability significantly.
Yeah. Those are some really helpful examples.
Yeah.
I can see how those probability traps can really lead us down the wrong path.
Totally. And Pinker doesn't stop there. He goes on to explore this idea of rational choice.
Oh.
How we make decisions that align with our values.
Oh, interesting.
He introduces the theory of rational choice, which seems very straightforward at first, but
There's always a but.
there is.
It can't be that simple.
No, because the axioms of rational choice, these ideas like consistency and transitivity, they seem obvious on the surface.
Yeah.
But in real life, we violate them all the time without even realizing it.
So even when we think we're being rational, there are these hidden traps we can fall into.
Exactly.
Okay, tell me more. I'm completely hooked now.
It's fascinating, right?
Yeah. It's like our emotions are like hijacking our rational decisions.
Totally.
So tell me, what kind of hidden traps should I be watching out for?
Well, let's look at something called taboo trade-offs. This is like our reluctance as humans to put a price tag on certain things,
Okay.
even when it might be the most logical choice.
Yeah, I can see that. Like, how do you put a dollar value on a human life?
Exactly.
Or on endangered species? It just feels wrong.
Yeah, and yet we make those kinds of trade-offs all the time.
Right.
Often implicitly. So like, how much are we willing to spend on safety features in a car?
Hmm?
Or how much should we invest in cancer research versus education?
Right. Those are tough.
Yeah, they're tough questions, but they involve weighing costs and benefits,
Right.
even when those costs involve human life.
So even when we think we're making these decisions purely based on values,
Yeah.
there are these calculations going on underneath.
Often, yeah. And then there are things called framing effects.
Okay.
This is how the way choices are presented can kind of nudge us in one direction or another,
Okay.
even if the underlying options are the same.
Oh, I've definitely fallen for this before. Like when a product is advertised as 90% fat-free instead of 10% fat, it's the same thing, but one just sounds so much healthier.
Totally. Or think about loss aversion.
Okay.
This is the idea that losses loom larger in our minds than gains do.
Right.
So we're more motivated to avoid a loss than we are to achieve an equal gain.
Oh, that's why that limited time offer tactic works so well.
Yeah,
It's like that fear of missing out, even if you didn't really want the thing in the first place.
Yeah. So these are just a few examples of how our psychology, can really get in the way of making perfectly rational choices.
It's really interesting. So with all of these biases and logical fallacies and things, does being more rational actually make a difference in our lives? Or is this just like a fun intellectual exercise?
I mean, that's the question, right?
Yeah.
And Pinker really addresses this head on. And I think the good news is that research suggests that being more rational does lead to better outcomes.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
So how do we know that? What's the evidence for this?
Well, studies have shown that people with better reasoning skills tend to have fewer negative life events,
Okay.
even controlling for things like intelligence and their background.
So it's not just about being smart.
Yeah.
It's about how you use that intelligence.
Totally. And this applies to all sorts of decisions. Think about financial decisions,
Right.
like those tempting extended warranties.
Ooh, those get me every time. It's like, is it worth the extra cost?
I know. A rational approach would involve really assessing the likelihood of the product breaking down,
Okay.
the cost of repair versus the cost of the warranty, But often we're swayed by fear.
Right.
The fear of that unexpected expense.
Right. Just in case.
Yeah. And we end up making a decision that may not actually be in our best financial interests.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that. My washing machine, anything that could break down, give me that extended warranty.
Totally. It makes you feel better. But with a little research and rational analysis, you might find that it's not really worth the cost.
Okay, good to know. So it sounds like rationality isn't just about winning game shows or solving these logic puzzles.
Right.
It actually has real-world implications.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it can help you make better financial decisions, navigate health choices, even just improve your everyday habits.
So rational thinking can lead to a better life. That's good. That's motivating.
Yeah, for sure.
So Pinker also says that rationality has a really big impact on society as a whole.
Yeah, he does.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
Well, think about it. Advances in science, medicine, technology, these are all products of rational inquiry.
That's true.
The systematic application of reason and evidence to solve problems.
I haven't thought about it that way. But that's a good point. If everyone just went with their gut all the time, who knows where we would be?
Exactly. We probably wouldn't have made very much progress. And even moral progress, like the decline of violence, the expansion of rights, these have often been driven by reasoned arguments. A willingness to challenge the status quo.
So it's not just about personal gain, it's about making a better world for everyone.
I think so, yeah. But Pinker doesn't shy away from the challenges to rationality.
Right.
He reminds us that we are all susceptible to biases, even the most intelligent people.
I guess I always assumed that smart people were more rational,
Yeah, it's a common assumption.
but I guess it's not always true.
Unfortunately, intelligence doesn't always equal perfect rationality.
Okay.
We're all prone to these cognitive biases,
Yes.
these systematic errors in our thinking that can really distort our judgment.
Okay, so tell me about these biases. What should I be watching out for?
Well, one of the most pervasive is what Pinker calls the my side bias.
Okay.
This is this tendency we have to favor information that confirms our existing beliefs.
Oh, I'm definitely guilty of that.
We all do it. It's natural.
Yeah, it's so easy to just dismiss information that challenges your worldview.
Totally. But the problem is that it can prevent us from seeing the world clearly
Right.
and from making truly rational decisions.
Okay, so how do we overcome that? Is it even possible?
It's definitely a challenge. But Pinker does give some practical advice.
Okay.
He says it's important to be aware of our own biases.
Okay.
Actively seek out diverse viewpoints.
Okay.
You know, it's easy to get trapped in our own little echo chambers.
Oh, for sure. Especially these days.
Surrounded by people who agree with us, you know? But it's valuable to step outside of that.
Sometimes it's uncomfortable, but I think you're right.
It's uncomfortable but essential.
Yeah.
And engage in critical thinking. Question your own assumptions. Look for evidence that might actually go against what you already believe.
That sounds like hard work, but I think it's probably worth it.
I think it is too. And Pinker also highlights the role of institutions in promoting rationality.
Oh, interesting. What kind of institutions?
Well, he talks about universities. Ideally, there should be spaces for viewpoint diversity, critical thinking, open inquiry.
Right.
They should be places where ideas can be challenged and debated and evidence takes precedence, not just dogma.
Like a true marketplace of ideas.
Yeah.
I like that.
He also talks about the importance of a free and independent press.
Okay. Yeah.
That actually fact-checks information, avoids false balance, and corrects errors transparently.
That's so important, especially in today's world.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much information flying around.
It's hard to know what to trust.
It really is. And then what about the digital age?
Yeah.
What about online platforms?
Well, that's a great point.
Yeah.
We need to think critically about the role of those platforms.
Right.
Are they designed to promote rationality or just to keep us glued to our screens?
It's a good question.
With all the clickbait and the outrage.
It seems like Pinker's really calling for us to rethink information
I think he is.
and how we engage with the world.
Yeah. I think he's arguing that rationality isn't just a personal virtue.
Okay.
It's a societal necessity. If we want to solve these complex problems that we're facing, climate change, you name it, we need to cultivate this culture of reason and evidence-based decision-making.
So it's not just about being right.
No.
It's about finding the best solutions,
Yeah.
even if they challenge what we already believe.
Yeah, exactly. That's the essence of what he's saying.
So we've talked about the sand people and how they use logic and probability.
Right.
The tricks that probability plays on us, those biases that we're all susceptible to.
Yeah.
What else can we learn from Pinker's book about rationality? It's like he's giving us this roadmap for building a more rational world.
Totally.
So where do we begin?
Well, Pinker gives us some practical advice.
Okay, great.
He says, it's important to recognize those pitfalls, those biases that we've been talking about.
Like confirmation bias, availability heuristic.
Exactly. We need to be aware that they exist.
Okay.
And that we're all susceptible.
So step 1 is awareness.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, what's next?
Next, we need to actively seek out diverse perspectives.
Oh.
It's easy to get trapped in our own echo chambers, right?
Oh, yeah. Surrounded by people who just agree with us all the time.
Exactly. But it's so valuable to get out of that and expose yourself to different viewpoints.
Yeah.
Even especially ones that you disagree with.
I think that's where it gets hard.
It's hard, but it's how we grow.
Right.
It helps us break free from those mental silos.
It's true.
And see things in a new light.
So you mentioned institutions before.
Yeah.
What role do they play in all of this?
Well, he really emphasizes the importance of institutions that foster critical thinking and open inquiry.
Okay.
So, he talks about universities. They should be spaces where diverse viewpoints clash and where evidence triumphs over dogma.
Right. Not just what we've always believed.
Exactly. He also talks about the press.
Okay. Yeah.
Ideally, it should serve as this reliable source of information.
Right.
Fact-checking, avoiding false balance, and correcting errors transparently. It's a high bar.
It is. It is a high bar, but with information overload everywhere.
It's so important. Yeah.
We need to be much more discerning.
Right. Always asking questions, figuring out where information came from,
Totally.
looking at multiple sides of a story.
Yeah. So Pinker is laying out this vision, right?
Yeah.
For cultivating rationality, both within ourselves
Okay.
and in the institutions that shape our society.
Yeah. But I imagine at the end of the day, it comes down to each of us.
It does. It all comes down to personal responsibility.
So what's the big takeaway then for our listeners?
I mean, I'd say the first step is pick up Pinker's book, Rationality.
Okay.
It's really fascinating. But beyond that, remember that rationality isn't about being perfect.
Okay.
It's about being aware of our limitations, challenging our biases, and trying to make decisions that are aligned with our values and based on evidence.
That's great advice. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have the Santa Evil, that my side bias that we all fall into. But the key takeaway is that rationality is a skill that we can cultivate.
And that it matters.
Yeah. It can help us make better choices, navigate this complex world, and live a better life.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks so much for joining us today on this journey into the world of rationality. Until next time, stay curious and keep those critical thinking skills sharp. A little bit of logic can go a long way.